Our conversation on the U.S. President Donald Trump's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are joined now on the line by Dr. Bob Wekesa from the Wits University. How has the President of the United States handled this COVID-19? If we look at when Dr. Wekesa, he heard the news, or it was broken to him around January, where he really thought by Easter, when it's a little bit warmer, the virus would miraculously disappear, to the outbreak that we now see in the United States, New York being almost the global epicenter of this virus. How have they handled this?
No, I think the U.S. has handled the pandemic quite poorly. In fact, it's disastrous. As you rightly point out, the president started off as a COVID-19 denier, suggesting that, in fact, the virus was not that advanced in the U.S., kind of saying it is a problem that will affect other countries and not a powerful superpower such as the U.S. But the country has had to reckon with the highest number of deaths, now approaching 100,000, with the highest number of infections going to nearly 1.5 million infected people as of today, and essentially devastating whole neighborhoods. Cities such as New York coming to a standstill. So it has come all the way from the president attempting to water down, to talk down, to dump down on the pandemic, to a situation where the U.S. is in a bad state.
Now, it's been reported that the president privately was quite critical of the expert in infectious disease, Dr. Anthony Fauci. And in recent times, we are seeing, in fact, as of last Thursday, we are seeing now the president publicly complaining about Dr. Fauci and being critical of the advice that he is getting from Dr. Fauci. What do you make of that? Why is the president now all of a sudden complaining publicly about the infectious disease expert?
My hunch is that the president is critical of Dr. Fauci because he is himself celebrity inclined. Let's not forget the fact that he came out of The Apprentice, which was a kind of a celebrity television, as it were. So he doesn't quite like it when someone seems to be taking the limelight. It should be Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. And in the recent times, opinion polls have actually indicated that Dr. Fauci and the other experts from the CDCs and so forth are far popular, compared to Trump himself, whose actually ratings against even contestants such as Joe Biden is actually falling, precipitously. And therefore, I think and obviously, Trump is not someone who is known for depth of knowledge on anything. He doesn't really go deep into reading documents or taking advice, particularly of a medical nature. In the recent time, we've seen some of his, suggestions of remedies such as use of hydrochloroquine and of sunshine, as you mentioned earlier, and suggesting that perhaps people could be injected with disinfectants. All those have been actually laughed at. In fact, people are laughing him out of town, as it were. And so for that reason, he will not really like experts, epidemiologists and virologists and so forth, who have the kind of depth of knowledge that he doesn't have. And I think that will be where the problem lies.
Now, the World Health Organization, as early as the 4th of Jan, alerting the rest of the world, including the U.S., of these cluster pneumonia cases. At the time, everyone was not clear as to whether there is human-to-human transmission and what the extent of the virus was. But as the time progresses, I mean, in that 30 days, a lot of information came out, and they began updating the U.S. on this information. But it's not up until quite late in March that we saw the U.S. beginning to lock down and shut the states. But now the President of the United States blaming the World Health Organization, saying, in fact, the job that they've done is said. I mean, what do you make of that? Is it scapegoating, or are they looking for somebody to blame?
No, I think to a very little small extent, the WHO might have, to blame, but I will take that as a very, less than 10% in my own reckoning. To a great extent, they did their best. I think for me, what I read here is a geopolitical game that President Donald Trump is playing. Because he's also facing elections later this year, in November for that matter. He has to find a scapegoat to hang on, someone to blame. And this will be China. And therefore, WHO comes in handy, in addition to China, to present a geopolitical blame item, blame target, so that you can actually then say, look, it's not us, it's WHO which delayed this whole matter. And China, and he has nothing to lose really, because Trump does not believe in multilateralism, which the WHO, which is a member organization, represents. And he has no qualms at all attacking China, because then it plays to his base, who are essentially neoliberalists, who love to see an attack on China on any account. So I'll read into that the fact that the WHO presented a very good opportunity for him to deflect scrutiny on he himself. And let's not forget that, in fact, in the past, Trump has walked away from the climate change agreement, which was UN-led. He has walked away from the nuclear deal, Iran nuclear deal, which was also UN-sponsored. And in fact, the US is not part of lots of other UN agencies, for example, the International Criminal Court. And therefore, the UN is fair game for a Trump who believes in America first, and to hell with the UN.
Now, the tensions between the U.S. and China, of course, intensifying now with the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, President Donald Trump very clear that this is a China virus, and China should be held responsible for the deaths that are ensuing globally. Is this going to, I suppose, take this tension that had already existed as far as trade is concerned a little bit further? And what is this going to do for the rest of the relations, particularly with Africa, considering that China has some interest here in the continent?
No, for certain, I think there is a big power play in place here. It did not just start with COVID-19. It was already in play well before that. Let's not forget that throughout last year, the US and China have been going through a major trade war, with accusations coming, fast and furious from either side of the divide, with the issues such as the 5G technologies that Huawei, a major telecoms company, is accused of using to do surveillance not just of the US but on other parts of the world where the US has interest. And therefore, COVID-19 just presents a new dimension, a new rise in those tensions, which many think are forged in the fact that the US seems to be a declining power in the thinking of many people, declining in terms of economic power and cultural power and so forth. And China is considered to be a rising power and a threat, therefore, to the superpower status of the US. China rising in terms of purchasing power parity, rising in terms of comprehensive GDP, rising in terms of capacity to do research, including in very complicated scientific areas such as AI and so forth. So the pandemic really, having started in Wuhan, presented a perfect opportunity for the escalation of the geopolitical battle. We've seen the conspiracy theories, and there's just a million of them coming out. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories. I've lost count myself. And that's just an expression of the geopolitical battle that we are seeing. I think from the African perspective now, we are forced to look at whom to ally ourselves with. It's almost a return to the Cold War period, when African nations had to choose between Russia and the communist end of things or the capitalist. And in this case, then, we African countries have to choose between China, which, and knowing very well that African countries have lots of debt with China right now. And they also have to look at superpower in the name of the U.S., which, although declining, remains very big economically, very powerful militarily, and name it.